Imagine waking up, you pay your municipal water bill, you buy a quick domestic plane ticket for a business trip, and then you send a few hundred burr to a family member on your phone.
Sounds like a totally normal day.
Right. But without even realizing it, you have just paid 3 separate mandatory hidden fees to the government. And that's, on top of your normal taxes.
Yeah, that is the wild part.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are broadcasting straight from the newsroom of Addis Fortune. It's Ethiopia's largest English weekly newspaper.
We've got a massive stack of investigative stories from their latest weekly editions to unpack for you today.
Exactly. Our mission is to give you a really comprehensive, on-the-ground snapshot of the Ethiopian economy right now. And, well, the overarching theme we keep hitting is just growing pains.
Oh, absolutely. It is a system undergoing a massive and honestly a sometimes really painful transition. When you look across the reporting from the Fortune newsroom this week, you see this economy where rising global costs, entirely new regulatory frameworks, and this desperate push for modernization are just completely colliding.
Crashing into each other.
Right. We're going to look at the micro level of how everyday citizens are being squeezed, and then zoom all the way out to how the entire African continent handles its money.
And its borders.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating for you listening is that by the end of this conversation, you're going to understand how all these seemingly isolated events like a paused construction site in Addis Ababa, an allegedly corrupt loan, and a grounded airline are actually driven by the exact same underlying economic pressures.
It's all connected.
It really is. So let's start with those hidden fees I mentioned at the top. The first major legislative trend highlighted in Addis Fortune is this huge surge in federal and regional governments using what they call ring-fence funds.
Right.
They're essentially bypassing the traditional tax system to pay for state responsibilities.
And I mean, the sheer creativity and the scope of where these mandatory contributions are appearing, that's what makes this so significant. The government is essentially shifting the burden of public risks directly onto daily consumer transactions.
The list is literally everywhere. There's a new bill proposing that owners of critical infrastructure have to directly fund a national cybersecurity office.
Wow.
Yeah. And the Federal Disaster Response Fund is now taking a 5% cut from digital banking and telecom services, plus a 1% cut from insurance premiums.
It adds up fast.
Right. And if you're a public servant in Addis Ababa, 0.5% of your salary is automatically diverted to an emergency fund. Oh, and residents are seeing a 5 burr flat fee just tacked onto their water bills.
You also have an aviation security fee now added to airline tickets, and telecom operators are mandated to pay 1.5% of their gross annual revenue into a universal access fund.
Okay, I have to pause here because this feels exactly like a hidden subscription model, but for government services.
That's a good way to put it.
You never sign the terms and conditions, but every time you swipe your phone or buy airtime, a fraction is just, siphoned off.
Right.
But help me understand the logic here. The government is already collecting close to 50% of its revenue from citizens through traditional channels, right? Like VAT and income tax.
Correct.
Why set up this complex web of microfees instead of just adjusting the tax code?
Well, to understand the government's approach, we have to look at the severe macroeconomic constraints they are operating under, which the reporting details really well. The ruling party argues this isn't a choice, it's an absolute necessity.
How so?
They point to a stark decline in foreign aid over recent years, combined with massively rising domestic spending needs. So the state simply cannot meet emergency demands like disaster relief or rapid infrastructure defense using the general budget alone.
Okay.
Representative Fethi, for instance, argues these specific bills face really rigorous parliamentary scrutiny. They're only passed when they determine the public won't be unduly burdened.
Let me push back on that, though, because the reporting also highlights a very vocal counterargument from inside Parliament itself.
It does, yeah. Critics like MP Mebratu Alemu argue that calling them, contributions or fees is just avoiding the word tax.
Right, it's a tax by another name.
Exactly. He points out that introducing these mandatory deductions right now during a period of severe inflation and rising living costs is critically stressing household budgets.
Oh, yeah, people are already struggling.
Yeah. And veteran lawyer Daniel Fikadu takes it a step further. He connects these microfees to the broader geopolitical picture.
Oh, really?
He argues the country is operating under wartime-like fiscal constraints. And he also points to external debt obligations, specifically pressures from the IMF. He suggests those pressures heavily limit Ethiopia's ability to make independent macroeconomic policy decisions without finding these alternative revenue streams.
So when traditional avenues for borrowing or taxing are basically maxed out, you nickel and dime the daily economy to keep the state functioning.
That is the core concern, yeah. Bypassing traditional taxation means bypassing traditional budget oversight.
Ah.
When a government reaches into the same population repeatedly through routine daily services, it really tests the limits of public trust.
And when citizens and consumers are drained of their disposable income by these stealth taxes, the first thing they stop doing is investing and building.
Yep, they just stop spending.
Which brings us directly to the microeconomic reality on the ground. Because the businesses that are actually trying to build the physical infrastructure of the country, they are hitting an absolute brick wall right now.
We are seeing a severe paralysis in the construction sector. It's a perfect case study of how those high-level macroeconomic pressures we just discussed can completely crush a local industry.
The Fortune newsroom interviewed people who've been in this industry for decades. Contractor Shwangaza Kevedy, who has 25 years under his belt, by the way, told reporters that the activity hasn't just slowed down, it's dead.
Completely dead.
Yeah. You have developers like Roman Tahir who have completely paused building projects in Addis Ababa. These projects are caught in a trap between budgets drafted like a year ago and a market that has become entirely untethered from reality.
To understand why the sites are dead, you really have to look at the mechanisms driving the material costs. We aren't just talking about regular inflation here, we are talking about a broken supply chain.
Walk us through those mechanics, because I know the price jumps are staggering. Sand going from 60,000 to 135,000 birr.
Unbelievable.
And wire going from 3,000 to 8,000 birr. Why is this happening so rapidly?
Well, take cement, for example, which jumped from 1,200 to 2,000 birr. That isn't just because the raw materials are scarce. It is heavily tied to the severe fuel shortages in the country.
Oh, because they need fuel to run the factories.
Exactly. Cement factories require massive amounts of energy to run their kilns.
Yeah.
So when fuel is restricted, production drops, scarcity spikes, and prices just explode.
Makes sense?
Furthermore, you need fuel to transport the sand and the cement. The reporting notes that a simple taxi delivery for materials went from 800 to 1,600 birr.
Double. Just doubled overnight. And if you can't fuel the heavy machinery for excavation, the site just stops. Which means laborers, like Ermias Yeimer, who was featured in the story, face immediate layoffs.
Right.
They are sent home because the site literally cannot afford to turn on a bulldozer.
It creates this devastating ripple effect through the urban working class.
I want to play devil's advocate here regarding the official narrative, though. The Ministry of Trade points to the Middle East conflict, saying it's disrupting global fuel supply routes.
That's their stance, yes.
But let's look at the context. Construction is now a massive 21% of Ethiopia's GDP. That is up from just 11% a decade ago. It actually overtook manufacturing.
It's massive.
Right. So isn't blaming a global conflict glossing over a much more dangerous domestic reality? I mean, the sector is entirely over-reliant on imported inputs.
That's a very sharp observation, and honestly, it's the exact vulnerability economists are warning about. This situation is a massive stress test for Ethiopia's public investment-led growth model.
Yeah.
You've built a huge chunk of your GDP on an industry that requires imported steel, imported fuel, and imported machinery. So while government officials maintain that no major national project has officially ceased, the reality for private builders is that they just cannot absorb the volatility.
So what are the proposed solutions?
Are
I mean, you can't just cross your fingers and hope global supply chains stabilize magically.
No, you can't. The solutions discussed in the reporting focus on forced adaptation. Authorities are pushing hard to accelerate import substitution.
Like using local materials.
Exactly. There's even a serious exploration of using alternative, locally sourced materials like bamboo and specialized wood where technically appropriate for structural work.
Wow, bamboo for structural work.
Yeah. But civil engineer Mazili Hailu offers a stark warning in the piece. He advises developers that building under these volatile prices exposes them to massive, potentially ruinous financial risk.
So what does he say to do?
If the project isn't absolutely urgent, his advice is to just pause.
But pausing has huge consequences. A prolonged disruption in construction directly chokes the housing supply and stalls overall urban development.
Absolutely.
And as we know, huge national projects and massive construction booms require incredibly deep financing.
They require billions of birr flowing continuously through the banking sector.
And when governance fails over those massive financial flows, the results are catastrophic. Let's look at a truly startling story out of the Commercial Bank of Ethiopia, or CBE.
This one is wild.
This week, Fortune reported on the revival of a massive corruption case against Nuri Hussein. He's the former vice president of CBE Noor, which is the bank's interest-free, Sharia-compliant division.
The allegations here highlight a terrifying vulnerability in how entirely new financial sectors are scaled.
The numbers alleged by prosecutors are genuinely difficult to comprehend. They claim Nuri accumulated over 264 million birr in personal wealth.
Just staggering.
We are talking multiple real estate properties, a Toyota Corolla Cross hybrid, just massive assets. But his total lawful documented income during that period was just 13 million birr.
Yeah, the math does not add up.
The core of the accusation is that he mismanaged 2 billion birr in loans distributed across 18 borrowers.
2 billion birr diverted entirely from its intended economic purpose.
I am really stuck on the mechanics of this, though, because Sharia financing is supposed to be incredibly strict.
Very strict, yes.
Under Sharia rules, a bank doesn't just hand a briefcase of cash to a borrower to go build a factory. The bank pays the supplier of the materials directly, and the borrower just receives the goods. It's heavily documented.
Exactly.
So how does 2 billion birr allegedly vanish in a system designed specifically to prevent cash mismanagement?
The structural failure prosecutors are outlining is fascinating. They allege that the oversight mechanisms were completely collapsed into a single point of failure. According to the charges, Nuri acted as both the approver of the massive loans and the guarantor.
Wait, so there was zero separation of powers?
None. By allegedly bypassing post-loan monitoring and failing to actually verify the receipts from the suppliers, the system's safeguards were completely neutralized.
That is insane.
And the most alarming detail is the claim that some of the borrowers and the suppliers were actually related entities.
Oh, I see.
Because the bank wasn't independently verifying the supply chain, the money was essentially paid to a quote-unquote supplier, only to be routed right back into the pockets of the borrower.
It's like installing a massive state-of-the-art vault door, but completely forgetting to build the concrete walls around the bank. Anyone can just walk around the back.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. As Ethiopia's financial sectors innovate rapidly, like, introducing Sharia-compliant banking to serve a huge, previously unbanked population, the regulatory frameworks are lagging dangerously behind the actual flow of capital.
Yeah, the money moves faster than the rules.
Exactly. When you have billions of birr moving through brand new channels without hardened, independent, multi-layered oversight, you create massive loopholes for exploitation.
And that desperate need for dedicated, independent financial oversight connects directly to our next story. Because the banking sector's total dominance has left other critical pillars of the financial system completely in the shadows.
It really has.
Which brings us to a massive, decades-in-the-making overhaul of Ethiopia's insurance industry.
This is a sector that has been treated as an afterthought by regulators for a very long time.
The government is finally taking action by shifting oversight of the insurance sector away from the National Bank of Ethiopia, the NBE, to a brand new autonomous watchdog. It's called the Ethiopian Insurance Regulatory Authority, or ERA.
And to understand why pulling this away from the central bank is so critical right now, you really just have to look at the disparity in the economic data.
The statistics Fortune published are wild. Listen to this. The financial sector as a whole makes up 37.2% of Ethiopia's GDP.
Right.
But insurance, it accounts for only 1.5% of total financial assets in the country. And the insurance penetration rate, meaning the percentage of the population actually using insurance products, is a tiny 0.3%.
It's almost non-existent.
To put that in perspective for you listening, the African average is 3.6%.
There is an ocean of untapped potential there. But when the central bank is busy managing massive currency crises, inflation, and 2 billion birr banking scandals, they simply do not have the bandwidth to nurture a fragile insurance market.
So what does this new bill actually do to fix the market? It makes a few radical structural changes, right?
Yes, very radical.
First, it allows up to 49% foreign capital into the sector, broken down as 40% strategic investment and 7% non-strategic. Second, it finally introduces a formal regulatory framework for Takaful, which is Sharia-compliant insurance. And third, it forces the complete separation of life insurance and general insurance into entirely independent entities.
It is a complete structural teardown.
It feels like taking a local minor league sports team and just tossing them straight into the World Cup. You are suddenly exposing this highly sheltered, underdeveloped industry to foreign competition and tougher capital rules.
Yep.
But at least you're finally giving them their own dedicated referee.
And integrating with those global standards is the ultimate goal here. Insurance expert Asejd Jebrameddin notes in the reporting that this legislation is a vital turning point.
Why is it so vital?
Because if Ethiopia wants to integrate deeper with the global financial system, it needs an insurance sector that foreign investors actually recognize, understand, and trust. You cannot attract massive foreign direct investment if the investors cannot insure their assets using globally recognized framework.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
But let me guess, the local industry isn't exactly thrilled about being thrown into the deep end.
Oh, there is significant friction. Industry insiders like Fikret Sagaye are sounding the alarm over that specific rule, forcing life insurance companies to stand completely on their own.
Why is separating life insurance such a threat to them?
Because life insurance only accounts for about 5% of the total insurance business in Ethiopia right now. It is incredibly weak.
So how do they survive currently?
Currently, general insurance profits subsidize the life insurance divisions, forcing these weak life insurance operations to become completely independent corporate entities, requiring their own massive capital reserves in such a shallow market. It might actually bankrupt them before the sector has a chance to mature.
Wow.
You are demanding scale and expertise that just does not exist locally yet.
It's the ultimate regulatory catch-22. You need regulation to grow safely. But applying strict global regulations to a fragile local system can just shock it into a coma.
Innovation requires regulation, but timing is everything.
Well, Ethiopia's ambition to integrate with global standards doesn't stop at its financial borders. It is heavily tied to its physical role as a regional connector. So let's zoom out from the domestic markets to the skies right above them for our final story.
We are looking at perhaps one of the most frustrating paradoxes in global economics today.
The story of African aviation is baffling. Passenger traffic across the continent is booming. It's up 20.6%.
Which is the highest growth rate anywhere globally, by the way.
Exactly. Yet, African airlines are the least profitable on Earth.
The disparity in the profit margins requires an explanation because it almost sounds like a typo when you first read the report.
An average African airline makes $1.30 in net profit for every single seat flown.
$1.30.
Meanwhile, in the Middle East, airlines are clearing $28.60 per seat.
It's a huge gap.
Now, to be clear, Ethiopian Airlines is a massive outlier here. They perform well above the African average. They're a global powerhouse supporting 500,000 jobs. But across the rest of the continent, nearly half of the 50 operational airlines are flying at a total loss.
And the question is, how can an industry with booming demand be losing so much money?
The Fortune piece lays out a toxic cocktail of barriers. First, you have sky-high government taxes on tickets and operations. Second, aviation fuel in Africa is priced 17% above global benchmarks.
That hurts.
And third, you have this nightmare scenario of blocked funds. There is currently $774 million that airlines have earned, but are being held hostage by African countries. Algeria alone is holding $258 million.
We need to explain how blocked funds actually work because it literally paralyzes the industry.
Yeah, break that down for us.
So when a foreign airline sells a ticket in Algeria, they collect Algerian dinar. But an airline needs US dollars to buy airplanes, purchase fuel, and pay international staff.
Right.
If the Algerian government restricts access to foreign exchange, the airline cannot convert its dinar into dollars to take its profits out of the country. The money is essentially trapped in a local bank account while the airline's dollar expenses just keep piling up elsewhere.
You cannot run a capital-intensive, high-velocity business like an airline if you cannot repatriate your own revenue.
Exactly. It drains liquidity overnight.
But let me play devil's advocate for a moment. African governments are desperate for revenue to build basic infrastructure, roads, hospitals, schools. Aviation largely caters to a tiny, relatively wealthy percentage of the population, or foreign business travelers. Can you really blame these governments for taxing airlines heavily to fund essential domestic needs?
It's a fair question, but aviation leaders argue it is incredibly short-sighted. Camille Alawadi from the International Air Transport Association and Yonatan Menkir, a veteran pilot, both highlight that treating airlines as a luxury cash cow stifles broader economic growth.
How much does it actually contribute?
Aviation contributes $75 billion to the continent's GDP. You don't tax a highway to death if you want trade to flow between cities, right?
Right.
The barrier here is deeply political. These borders in the sky were essentially drawn during colonization, and maintaining strict bilateral hurdles is a form of modern protectionism.
So countries are afraid of opening their skies because they want to protect their own struggling state-owned airlines from competition.
Precisely. And there are massive initiatives designed to fix this. SADM, the Single African Air Transport Market, was created specifically to liberalize the skies and drop these protectionist hurdles.
Okay, so there's a plan.
There is, but as Alawati points out with incredible frustration, when industry leaders try to bring this up at high-level African Union meetings, they just get ignored. The critical discussions are pushed to late-night sessions long after the transport ministers have already left the building.
They're literally walking out on the solution.
Because liberalizing the market means giving up short-term control and tax revenue for long-term continental growth. It's a political trade-off many leaders are just unwilling to make.
Which brings us full circle to the very beginning of our discussion.
It does. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, but the pattern is remarkably consistent.
We started at the micro level, looking at how the state relies on stealth taxes and micro fees to survive, basically draining the disposable income of everyday citizens.
Yeah.
We saw how those macroeconomic pressures, combined with fuel shortages, are completely paralyzing the construction sector. We looked at the terrifying loopholes created when billions of birr flow through new financial channels without proper oversight.
Like the CBE Nor scandal.
Exactly. Then we discussed the desperate, risky overhaul of the insurance industry to meet global standards. And finally, we zoomed out to see how regional protectionism and taxes are keeping African aviation grounded despite record demand.
It paints a really profound picture of a region caught between the desperate need for short-term revenue and the foundational requirements for long-term growth.
And it leaves us with a final, somewhat provocative thought to mull over. We have seen today how heavily governments rely on hidden fees, delayed payments, and high taxes just to stay afloat from month to month. But as everyday citizens, local builders, and global industries get pushed to their absolute financial limits, at what point does the sheer cost of simply doing business permanently cost a country its future prosperity?
Finding the balance between extracting revenue and encouraging growth is the defining challenge for the entire region right now.
It truly is. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this special edition deep dive. As always, you can find the full reporting and dive even deeper into all of these stories in this week's edition of Addis Fortune. Have a great week of learning ahead, and goodbye.